Okay, we might get started. So, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you to another one of our UOW Welcome webinars. This one is for week 7 and it's all about road safety. If you have any questions, please pop those in the Q&A tab there and we will try and get to those at the end of the session. Before we begin, we acknowledge that country for Aboriginal peoples is an interconnected set of ancient and sophisticated relationships. The University of Wollongong spreads across many interrelated Aboriginal countries that are bound by this sacred landscape and intimate relationships with that landscape since creation. From Sydney to the Southern Highlands to the South Coast, from freshwater to bitter water to salt, from city to urban to rural. The University of Wollongong acknowledges the custodianships of the Aboriginal peoples of this place and space that has kept alive the relationships between all living things. The university acknowledges the devastating impact of colonisation on our campus's footprint and commit ourselves to truth-telling, healing and education. I would like to introduce to you all Connie Graff who joins us for today from New South Wales Health. Thank you, Connie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me this afternoon or early evening. I might share my screen to start off with and bring up a presentation. Hopefully you can see all this. Just to introduce myself, my name is Connie. I'm a health education officer working in the Illawarra Shoalhaven Local Health District, Drug and Alcohol Services. And I'm presenting to you today on driver safety, which was part of my job portfolios for quite some time, working alongside the Transport for New South Wales road safety officers there. Some of the learning outcomes for today are essentially road safety, and I will talk about essentially what our biggest killers on Australian or New South Wales roads are, and that's speed, fatigue, distraction, alcohol and drugs. And I will also give a bit of guidance on the website Transport for New South Wales and how to go about licensing, registration and attending learner courses. Just to start off with, to give maybe a little bit of a grim picture, but we do need to talk about some of the crash statistics to outline what's happening. This one here are the updated statistics for New South Wales, and I looked them up just yesterday. For the 12-month period up until yesterday, we had 281 fatalities on New South Wales roads. So 281 people lost their lives. And we usually say that about 40 people are affected by just one fatality. And when we think of a crash, we often need to look at the people involved in a crash, but also the people that have witnessed the crash, people that attended to maybe provide first aid, but then also ambulance, police, fire brigade, anyone that is attending. And then following on from that, people at the hospitals, the nurses, the doctors, and as well the families of the people that have passed away. In addition to fatalities, we had more than 10,000 hospitalizations in 2021. So people that had to go to hospital as a result of a crash. More than 9,000 or almost 9,000 were serious injuries. And the reason why I listed that is because serious injuries are they have quite an impact on someone's life. So a serious injury means that a person's life has changed, possibly forever. Maybe they had a brain injury, lost a limb, had some serious organ damage. So they're injuries that we need to be aware of and need to mention in our statistics. And when I talk crash statistics, I obviously include all road users: drivers, passengers, motorcyclists, pedestrians, and pedal cyclists. As I mentioned, I will talk about different topics here, and I might start with the topic of speed or speeding. There is obviously a consequence of us going too fast on the roads, and speed or speeding accounts for about 41% of all fatalities that we see on our roads and 24% of all serious injury crashes. That means that every year we almost have 150 people that lost their lives due to speeding or going too fast, and more than 1,270 people are seriously injured. And our statistics show us that people that often do tend to go too fast usually are overrepresented as being male, was 84%, and 75% under the age of 50. Speed and the difference, and I think that's something that we need to highlight, and I'll see if my cursor is working a little bit. I've got 2 slides on this one. So this one, obviously, as you can see, talks about the collision speed and the probability of a fatality here, and in different colors: pedestrian, cyclist collision, side impact collision, or head-on collision. And just giving the example, for instance, of a pedestrian or cyclist, they don't have any cushioning. Maybe as a cyclist you wear a helmet, but other than that, there's nothing there to protect you if you get hit by a car. And in New South Wales or in Australia, if we travel through a school zone at, say, 40 kilometers an hour, if you travel at 40 kilometers an hour and hit a pedestrian or a cyclist, that pedestrian has a 40% chance of ending up as a fatality, which is quite severe actually when we think of it. And now, I don't need an answer, but I know that everyone can do a bit of self-reflection here and think of how often are we maybe going a little bit over the speed limit. And for a school zone, for instance, even if it's just 10 kilometers more an hour at 50 kilometers an hour, that impact to the pedestrian could mean that it's almost a 90% chance of that being a fatality then. So big difference here, and 10 kilometers can make a massive difference. And I might switch to the next slide to show you the impacts for other collisions here. So again, same kind of concept here, but talking about the survival rather than the fatality risk. So again, pedestrians here. This one here is the side-on crash or the T-bone crash, as it often happens at intersections. So again, vehicle 1 traveling, and vehicle 1, the driver or passenger, would be better protected simply because of that buffer zone that you have, that kind of crumble zone that you have on the car. If you T-bone a car, the driver or the passenger are obviously more impacted by that crash. And you can see at 50 kilometers an hour, there's a 90% chance of surviving that crash. However, at 70 kilometers an hour, that reduces to about 20%. A head-on collision, in this case, you have cars meeting head-on, and again, a bit of a buffer zone for both cars. At 60 or 7 kilometers an hour, still a good chance, 95% chance of surviving a crash like that. But at 90 kilometers an hour, the force of that impact is just too much even for the body to absorb, and that fatality rate goes right up and your survival rate down to 20%. So speed can make a big difference when it comes to the impact speed can have in a crash. In Australia, we have different speed signs. We've got advisory signs, or signs that really tell you this is the maximum speed you can do. In short, anything that has a number and a red circle around is a sign that tells you this is the maximum speed you can do on this road. It is not a maybe this speed and maybe a little bit more. This is the maximum you can do. Saying that, if the weather is really bad and it's like in recent weeks where there's a lot of rain and mist and fog and you can't really see very well, then it is advisable to go lower than the speed advised on this sign. So this would be a normal speed sign here in Australia. We also come across the roadwork speed signs, which you might see on highways. So a highway might have 100k speed limit, but all of a sudden you come across this roadwork sign telling you slow down to 40. School zones, again, speed signs, number, red circle around. Not all school zones have the flashing lights. Just imagine those lights up here would flash for school zones. And they would flash during certain times when the school children either are attending school or coming to school or leaving school. So be aware of those times. Like I said, some school zones don't have the flashing lights, in which case you need to look at your watch and check the times to make sure that you slow down to 40 kilometers an hour. And I'm not sure if you have ever noticed buses, especially student buses or school buses display those speed signs as well and tell you 40 when lights flash. If it is in an area where you can safely overtake a bus like that, you only need to overtake this bus at 40 kilometers an hour if those lights flash. If it's a one-line road, you might have to stay behind the bus and not overtake. And then we also have those yellow signs, as you can see here. They're advisory speed signs, and you often see them displayed when it comes to approaching corners, say on regional roads. And this one here, this example tells you 55 kilometers an hour. It is advised to go that speed. The speed limit might be 70 or 80 on that road, but for this particular corner, it is advised that you slow down to this speed, which would be a safer speed to approach the corner. So different signs, and that's kind of the difference between the yellow and the red. And red obviously always tells us something important is happening here. So if there's a number in the red circle, that's the maximum speed you should be doing on that road. Why should you reduce your speed? Well, first of all, it allows you to have more time to assess for hazards. It also reduces the distance that you travel while you're reacting to hazards. We usually say that it takes about 1.5 seconds for the brain to send that message that it has just noticed something on the road down to the brake foot for you to respond. And during those 1.5 seconds, you usually travel quite a distance, and the faster you go, the greater the distance. It therefore reduces your brake distance, increases your driver control of the vehicle, and reduces the impact of forces on the crash and also survival rates. An example here, both cars say started braking at, once they approached this sign, the first car traveling at 100 km an hour, the second one at 110. And you can see by the time the first car came to a stop, the second car that was traveling only 10 kilometers more per hour was still traveling at 54 kilometers per hour. So if someone would have stepped out in front of both cars at this point, the impact for the second vehicle and for the second person would have been more dramatic. Does it really make a difference? We ask ourselves this every time we're on the roads and we see people zipping in and out of lines. We usually catch up with them at the next traffic lights. Look, it doesn't really make a big difference quite often. It's just a few seconds that will, like I said, you probably make up that time by the time you get or approach the next traffic lights. So it often doesn't make a big difference at all. In fact, it just puts you and other road users at risk if you do speed. There are penalties here in Australia for speeding, and there are 3 ways you can get caught. One is through a fixed speed camera. They're often located at intersections, but sometimes even on the highway or approaching tunnels. Some of those speed cameras even include red light cameras. So that means that if you approach an intersection and you think you speed up a little bit to make it through on a green light, it might actually get you speeding. So be aware that there are cameras around the area that will monitor your speed. Mobile speed cameras are often located in cars. And it used to be until recently that they had to actually notify you by putting up some signage before that vehicle to let you know that there's a speed camera. But under new laws, they don't have to display those signs anymore, and you might not be aware until the flash comes up in that vehicle. Be aware. Same as police officers, they can be out on the road with their little lasers, checking people's speed and obviously pulling people over if they do speed. The fines and penalties really depend on the speed you're doing in certain zones. It might end up that you end up with a fine. And I can tell you, and I will disclose here that, yes, you might hear from my accent, I came from overseas myself many, many years ago. And when I first came to Australia, I had a couple of speeding fines. It was many years ago. Back then, I was on an international license and just had to pay some money. What I didn't know at the time is that when I changed for my Australian driver's license, I actually automatically lost some points on my license. So be aware that, even on an international license, you might not be able to lose points, but you will definitely have to pay fines, and you might end up losing those points when you change over to an Australian license. If you're doing a great speed over the speed limit, you might end up with a suspension or disqualification, and the confiscation of number plates or even cars is something that happens to people that we call in Australia hoon or hooning, people that kind of drag race or race other cars on the roads. So if that's happening, and if the police finds that you were part of someone racing someone else on the road, then they impound your car and you won't get it back, or they take your number plates off you. Also being aware, as a learner or provisional license holder, you will be suspended from driving for 3 months for any speeding offense. So it's really important that you watch those speed limits and that you apply those speed limits. I might give it a short second to see if there is a question.
Yeah, Connie, there is a question. So we had Bharat ask, are school times the same across New South Wales? That is a big one.
That's a big one. And the answer to that one is not always. It depends if it's a state public school, private school. They can vary a little bit. There are usually times for in the morning and in the afternoon, but the times depend. Also being aware that when it comes to school zones, we often hear that maybe the school children have an additional school holiday that was added, I don't know, because the teachers have some planning day or something like that. Even though you might be aware that, hey, the children are not in school today, unless it's a proper school holiday that is in the school holiday calendar, you will still have to go by that speed limit in that zone, which means that you still have to slow down to 40, even though there might not be any children around. And it is quite important. And I know here in our area, yes, most school zones are in the city. There might be a 60k area reducing to 40 kilometers an hour for school times. But there are a couple of school zones that are within an 80 kilometer an hour stretch of a road. So be aware that you really need to slow down, because driving at 80 kilometers an hour in a school zone might end up meaning that you lose your license if you get caught. So that was one that I just wanted to point out. But a good question. And I hope that answered that one.
Yep, there's no other questions at this stage, Connie.
Okay. And I might then move on quickly and talk about the next one. And hold on, that one, fatigue. And look, fatigue is a funny one, but it's certainly something we all need to be aware of, because it's something you can't sometimes plan. It just comes over you at the worst moment. Fatigue is actually one of the biggest killers, or one of the 3 biggest killers on our roads, because it can happen on short trips, but also long trips. And Australia is a huge country, and we've got long, long roads. fatigue is something that can happen on those long drives. But saying that, it often even happens very close to home, mainly for the reasons that when we're close to home after a busy day, we switch off. Our brain already switches off, and we think about what to cook for dinner or what to wear at a party, things like that. So it's really highlighting that we need to pay attention on the road. Fatigue is caused by a few things. One is our circadian rhythm, and that's our natural sleep cycle. And I know as well, having been a student in the past, I used to have a part-time job where I was doing night shifts. Throwing in night shifts or staying up late, that interrupts that rhythm. And our natural sleep cycle would mean that we sleep at night when it's dark and we are awake at day when it's daylight. Working at nighttime can disrupt that cycle and that rhythm and can make you sleepy at other times during the day. Sleep debt, that's the sleep that you missed. And again, reflecting back on those times where you might have exams, you might be stressed, you might not be able to sleep because you're anxious, or as well drawing on experience from people that say they are having maybe some small children at home, looking after a newborn that is crying a lot. You end up missing a lot of sleep. And when you miss a lot of sleep over a long period of time, that's what we call sleep debt, which again can make you sleepy at different times of the day, often in the car when you should pay attention. Sleep inertia, that's something that happens to most of us early in the morning when we wake up and when we really want to hit that snooze button. It's that moment where you're not fully awake just yet. And depending on the person, it can take 15 minutes for some people to a couple of hours for other people. Often what helps is a bit of fresh air, maybe a shower, coffee, something like that, that will help people actually awake fully. If you're someone that knows that your morning is a little bit slower and you feel more tired in the morning, then don't plan that large or that long trip straight away, straight after getting up. Give yourself a bit more time to be fully awake. Micro sleep, that's this unplanned sleep that we experience sometimes, often a few seconds to a couple of minutes. It's what is very dangerous on our roads. When we are asleep for a few seconds on the road, we don't react. We are not doing anything. We often travel at high speeds, say on a regional road, doing 80 or 100 k's an hour. And we might approach a little bend in the street or a curve, and or we might not steer into that direction, which means that you might hit a tree at high speed, which is the reason why fatigue is actually one of the biggest killers on our roads. So microsleep, again, can even happen with your eyes open, where you're just completely unaware of what's happening because your brain has switched off and is actually asleep. Some of the symptoms and warning signs, not just for yourself to look for, but also when you're a passenger and when you notice, the driver might yawn a little bit too often or blinks their eyes a bit too often. Obviously, feeling tired, that feeling drowsy, you yawn. You feel your concentration might lack a little bit, you feel a little bit restless, you blink more, show slower reactions, maybe a bit of oversteering on some roads. We often find that people get a bit bored in those moments and use their mobile phones or play with the radio a bit more. And this automatic driving on routine and familiar trips, this driving where you just can't remember the last intersection, they're kind of typical warning signs that you're fatigued and that you need to pull over. Staying safe, certainly. And look, being a student in Australia means, yes, you might want to explore the country, you might want to go on a road trip. Advice here is get a good night's sleep, rest before you go on that trip. Avoid driving at night time. I know that a lot of people say, let's get started early in the morning or 2 in the morning, the roads are empty. But here in Australia, we have a lot of wildlife as well, and that brings its own dangers as well. So avoid driving at night and plan and take your breaks. Share the drive if you can. That means if there's someone else with a license, certainly share the drive, switch drivers. And we've got a couple of websites that I want to make you aware of. One, it's not a bad one. It's called Test Your Tired Self, or Don't Trust Your Tired Self, sorry. I might quickly click on a link and show you what it looks like, but it's essentially like a little self-test. First of all, this website is called Centre for Road Safety, again, part of Transport for New South Wales, and it's got a lot of really good information. A couple of videos as well, what it looks like for people that drive when fatigued and fall asleep. But there is a little link on this website, and I'm happy to share all those links separately to this in an email. And once you click on this, there is this website. Once you accept terms and conditions, you can do a bit of a test. And you can even connect on Facebook on that one. And it just tests, I guess, a bit of your reaction times a little bit. It's actually quite, I find, not always easy to do. It depends on the time of the day. Even for me, at the end of a big working day, if I would go on this website and do this test, I might feel that I'm not as switched on anymore as I would be earlier in the day. So a good one to do if you want to have a bit of a go at that. Another app or another website I want to just show you is the New South Wales Rest Area and Driver Reviver app. So you can download this on your phone if you plan a trip. Other than that, you can also look out when you're driving for those signs, and especially now over school holidays, those signs will pop up again. Again, very useful website. And like I said, you can download this one as well. Hopefully it loads and you can see it. Comes up with a little map, and you can pick what kind of vehicle you're driving. Obviously for truck drivers, different stops that they can approach. But say you're around in the car, you can have a look. You can plan your route, you can zoom in, you can even tick here if you want a place with a bit of a shelter, or say in the next few days when the driver reviver sites pop up again, you want your free coffee. You just click on those and it will give you some spots where you can pull in and have a break. And yeah, sometimes even grab a free coffee, or maybe a coffee with a small donation to just, yeah, rest and get back on the road again. So 2 good websites that I wanted to share here. Might quickly ask the question again if there are any questions. I don't see any, so
No questions. Maybe if anyone wants to take a screenshot of those websites there, they're more than welcome to while that's up. And then we can move on to the next slide when you're ready, Connie.
Yep. Like I said, I'm happy to put all those websites as well in an email, and maybe you can share it with the students if there's interest as well.
No problem.
And I know that if I would do this face-to-face this session, I would bring those resources along, but being online, it's all a bit, you have to work things different ways. Mobile phones distraction, it's a big one as well. And I know most of us, we are almost glued to our phones nowadays, and often in situations where we shouldn't be. The rule in general is for anyone on a full license, and that means if you have an international license where you're not, you don't have any restrictions like being on a learner overseas or on a provisional license. If you have a full license that you're driving, you can use your mobile phone, but it needs to be mounted in a hands-free kit or be in a touch-free operation. So just to explain that, the best advice that I give is invest in one of those hands-free kits. They are very cheap nowadays. I am so sorry. My dog is just barking. So sorry. 1 second.
the beauty of working from home.
It is. It is. So switching back to mobile phones. So as I mentioned, the best would be to purchase a hands-free kit that you can mount your phone in your car. This way you can really use it for anything that you want, including navigation. Saying that, you can't use it for anything you want. You can use it for navigation, which means you can show the maps. You can use it for music and to make phone calls. You cannot use your mobile phone, even in this hands-free mounted bracket or touch-free operation, for any task of like taking photos or texting or being on Facebook or internet searches. You can't do that in the car whilst driving. For those functions, you really need to pull over and actually turn the car off, the ignition off, to use those functions. But other than that, if it's touch-free in operation, that usually means that it's voice activated or activated through the steering wheel. A lot of cars have those functions. Then in this case, you can have the mobile phone in your pocket if you want, or in your handbag next to you. But other than that, it's digitally touch-free. We don't want that distraction. We don't want people having their mobile phone in their hand or sliding across, because you're actually taking your eyes off the road. The difference here is that obviously that's for people on their full license, but for learners or people on their provisional license, you're actually not permitted to use your mobile phone at all whilst driving. And that includes listening to music or using the phone for navigation. I know it's an annoying rule because a lot of people try to use their phone for navigation. You can use a proper GPS navigation device. You can have that installed in your car, but you cannot use your mobile phone for that function. Again, there is a road safety, again, on the Center for Road Safety website. Know the rules. It's all here listed to the left. Mobile phones, know the rules. And it tells you what you can and can't do. So it's a very useful website that I encourage everyone to have a look at. What happens if you take your eyes off the road, even just for 2 seconds? And often that's what it takes to just even unlock the screen. At 60 kilometers an hour, you travel about 33 meters, which is about 7 car lengths without actually seeing what's on the road. At 100 k's, it's about 55 meters and 13 car lengths that you've traveled without actually seeing what's in front of you. And I'm happy to share this link as well. There's a really good documentary which goes for about 20 minutes, and it's called It's People Like Us. And it shares the story of a few young people that say, I won't use my mobile phone that often, or I only use it in emergencies. And you see what they're doing behind the wheel. And my reaction was sometimes watching this is, I want to just tell them, just look on the road. It's quite confronting when you see actually how long it takes for you to look away or to look away onto the phone. So if anyone is interested and has a spare 20 minutes, I will share that link in the email as well. There are quite severe penalties nowadays. And what has been newly introduced just a few years ago are those mobile phone cameras. Those cameras are really good, and they actually take photos at about 3 angles, so they can really see what's happening in your car. Which means they can really zoom in on the driver. In this case here, you see a driver with their mobile at the steering wheel. Here is a driver with their mobile phone at close to the ear. And again, here you can even see that the passenger is actually holding a steering wheel while the driver is possibly texting. So those cameras are around. There are also mobile phone cameras, so cameras that they move around to different areas. And it's one of those penalties that has the highest demerit points. So if you get done for driving whilst texting or being on the phone, it is 5 demerit points you lose, plus a fine. And coming up with Easter, we have what is called a double demerit point period, where you could lose 10 points just with one offense. So best advice is just don't use your mobile phone really for driving. There are often mobile phones even often have the functions where you can set it up that when you're in motion in the car, that it just sends a message to whoever's calling or texting to say that you're currently driving and that you can't attend that phone call. Like I said, best advice, don't even start using your mobile phone. Put it to the side or have it in a cradle if you want to use it. Okay, I might quickly check again. I can't see any questions, so I will move on. But feel free if you want any clarification, pop it in the Q&A section and I will see if I can answer those questions. Next couple of topics around alcohol and drugs. And I need to acknowledge that not everyone is drinking alcohol and certainly not everyone is taking drugs. But being in Australia is a country where there's not often a good culture around alcohol consumption, and there's often a lot of pressure on people to drink alcohol or to use drugs. And it might not be yourself, but also you might be a passenger in a car where the driver might be under the influence. So it is really important to still listen to this and be aware of how alcohol and drugs can impact driving. For alcohol, the limit here in Australia is that if you're a learner or on a provisional license, your alcohol limit is 0, no alcohol at all in your blood. Might be easy if you say you're not drinking at all. It is a bit harder if, you say you're going to a festival or a party and you do drink at the party, but you say you stay overnight and you want to drive home or drive to work the next morning. You need to be at 0 alcohol limit the next morning, which can be difficult when you had maybe a few too many to drink the night before. For taxi drivers, bus drivers, truck drivers, their alcohol limit has to be under 0.02. And for everyone on their full license, including an overseas or interstate license, their limit has to be under 0.05. That means if you come up with a police check and blow into one of those machines and you come up with 0.05, that is already over the limit. And I can see a question that has just popped up. How do I know where to park and where not to park on different roads or roadsides? It's a little bit difficult for me to answer because obviously we have so many different roads. What I do on that one is, and please stay with me till the end. At the end, I will show you a good website where there is a driving, I guess, a knowledge test as well. And it might shed a bit of light and you might be able to find some of those answers in this kind of knowledge test that you can do, okay? So I'll see if I can get more information more towards the end of the session on that question. I guess back to alcohol. 1 second, making the slides work again. Short-term effects of alcohol. For some people it has no real effect. They might just feel a little bit intoxicated. But things that obviously to look out for are blurred vision, headache, nausea, vomiting. People often get injured when they drink a little bit too much alcohol. Some people experience mood swings where they get more aggressive, a bit more aggravated. Lack of coordination, reduced concentration and slow reflexes, as well as blackouts and alcohol poisoning. When you look at those effects, you certainly understand why it's not a good idea to drive when you had alcohol consumed. What happens, alcohol and driving, it really affects our ability to see and locate moving lights. And it reduces our ability to judge distances and make that right call. And judging distances is so important on the road for the ability to know when to stop, maybe for a red light, maybe for an intersection, maybe for someone stepping out in front of you. But also when you overtake a car, you want to make sure that you have enough space to overtake a car safely. Alcohol, unfortunately, also makes people take more risks sometimes. They feel more overconfident behind the wheel and maybe drive a little bit faster. But overall, it decreases your ability to respond to different things that are happening on the road. And I educate a lot of traffic offenders, so people that have actually been caught by the police and have to attend a proper training session. And quite often I hear that they know their way home from the pub. They know it's only a short drive. They go the back roads and no one will get hurt. They know exactly where to turn and what to do. But now understand that maybe today something is different on that road. Maybe there is, with all this rain, maybe there's a new pothole that has popped up, and you're driving through this pothole and turn the steering wheel because you're unaware that there was a pothole. Or maybe some wildlife steps out in front of you and you need to react. Or at the moment, again, we're between different seasons. The sun is setting at a different time, at a different angle. You might not be able to see quite well. So this responding to different things that are happening on the road can be very difficult when you're under the influence of alcohol. And what happens, especially when you had a lot more to drink, is that you have a shorter concentration span and you often overestimate your abilities and your vision changes as well. And that's what we call that peripheral vision, the sight vision is changing, and you actually end up with what is called tunnel vision, which makes you more likely to run into vehicles that are parked on the side of the road, or trees or street signs. You can see even at that, what essentially could still be a legal range for someone on a full license, you're twice as likely to end up in a crash. At a low range, you're 5 times more likely to end up in a crash, and just mid-range, 10 times more likely. So it changes our crash statistics quite dramatically. Here in Australia, we often talk about standard drinks, and it's hard sometimes to understand. A standard drink is defined as one that contains 10 grams of pure alcohol, but it's not something that you can see. And different types of alcoholic drinks contain different amounts of pure alcohol. Are you drinking a glass of wine, or is it a beer, or is it a spirit? You really need to check those labels, and we have introduced those labels. You can see them displayed here. This one, for instance, obviously talking about wine here, a bottle of 750 mils tells you that in this bottle of 750 mils, you have 7 standard drinks. That means that that glass of wine, and especially in those big fancy wine glasses, it's just over 100 mil, and that is 1 standard drink. It often doesn't look like much for wine, but that's kind of what a standard drink would look like. So beware that sometimes for wine glasses, especially at parties, if they are filled right to the top, you might actually consume 2 or 3 standard drinks in this one glass. This one here, I think, I can't even see what it is, might be a beer, a bottle. It says 1 standard drink. So that means drinking this bottle means you've consumed 1 standard drink. And I know it's very small and hard to see. This one, I think, must be a spirit. It has the number 22 on it. So that means that this bottle contains 22 standard drinks. So this is where you can calculate roughly what standard drinks look like. It's obviously a lot harder when you go to a party where maybe drinks are poured in the glass, or at the pub where you might not ask the bartender what's the percentage of alcohol in this wine or in this beer. And beer can vary. Here's just another little slide. Are you drinking a full strength beer at 4.9%, or are you drinking a light beer at 2.7%? So the standard drinks can change just based on that. Same for spirits. Some spirits at 40% alcohol, some might be 28, some might be at 50 or 60%. So those standard drinks in that bottle can change depending on the alcohol. And while we don't say count your drinks to stay under the legal limit or to be safe, simply because there's no guarantee that you do, we still want you to be aware of that standard drink kind of guideline. Why do we say there's no guarantee to stay under the legal limit is because there are too many variables to accurately calculate your blood alcohol concentration. First of all, how many drinks did you actually consume? Did you get it right in regards to standard drinks? What is your gender, your age, your weight, your body size? In my role, I used to go to festivals and do breathalyzers as a promotion there. And quite often we had a group of people that come up, males, females, different sizes, different weight and body sizes, age. And often when they come as groups, they had the same to drink and want to show off who is blowing the highest limit, funny enough. And you will realize that every single one of them blows a different range. Sometimes, yes, a small female, a lightweight, might blow a much higher blood alcohol concentration than, say, a guy at heavier weight and larger body size. It's also affected by your health, the health of your liver and your level of fitness, your tolerance to alcohol and your medication that you take. And it can change if you've just have recovered, say, from the flu or even COVID, your health might be impacted and you might not metabolize the alcohol as quickly as you think you are or as you used to. I have a quick sticky bit at the question to see if it fits and see. Do we get to buy these alcohol detectors as home test kits? See if I can share it within the next couple of slides. So obviously test kits, yes. Well, Australia or New South Wales, we are doing something, or the police is doing something that is called breathalyzers, or called RBT, random breathalyzer testing. And literally every police car that you see on our roads is equipped with those breathalyzers. And the police can pull you over at any point without any suspicion. They can just pull people over and test them. And they do about 5 million of those tests every year, so quite a huge number there. Since they introduced those breath tests, the alcohol rates, the fatality rates have actually dropped. They were introduced in 82 from about 40% to now about 15%. So doing those breathalyzers and doing them randomly has actually really helped bringing those fatalities down. To click on the slide again. Essentially, that's the breathalyzers you can come across. Look, you can order breathalyzers online, and my advice is don't bother. Especially with those cheap ones, they might not give you an accurate reading, and they might actually let you believe that you're all right to drive when in fact you're not. Those breathalyzers that the police is using, they are a lot more expensive and they're calibrated usually every 6 months. They're also there to purchase, they're called alcoholyzer. But if you go and check them out, you realize that they're a lot more expensive and might not be something you want to purchase. You might also see breathalyzers installed at pubs and clubs and other venues. I think a Unibar might even have one. Here you often pay a small fee and you have to use a straw, put it in that machine and then blow into that breathalyzer. They are also regularly calibrated and are pretty accurate for that. Saying that, we need to understand how it actually works in the body. And your blood alcohol concentration is actually the number of grams of alcohol per 100 mils in your blood. And your blood alcohol concentration essentially starts to rise as soon as you start drinking. But it can still continue to rise up for 2 or more hours after you stop drinking. So that's where it's really hard to calculate, are you actually going up and are you actually blowing more alcohol in 5 minutes time than you have just now when you tested at the pub? or are you actually on the way down and actually will blow less if you get pulled over on the side of the road? To give you an understanding, and that's where the standard drinks come back into a calculation here, your body takes about 1 hour to process one standard drink. After 5 minutes, it just starts to enter your bloodstream. So for the first few minutes when you had a drink, you obviously have a lot of alcohol still in your mouth. And usually if that happens, the police gives you a bit of time to kind of let that settle. And that alcohol, once it's in your stomach, it gets absorbed into the bloodstream. Depends if you had food or no food. If you had no food, drinking on an empty stomach usually means that you feel the effects of alcohol quite quickly because it all gets absorbed into the bloodstream quite fast. But once you had food in your tummy, it is a process that will take some time. It then goes over and eventually goes to all your organs, including your liver. Your liver will start to break down the alcohol. Your lungs, you're exhaling alcohol. After about 45 minutes, your blood alcohol concentration would have been at the peak. And after about an hour, you would be coming back to zero. So that's roughly a guide on how you process alcohol. But again, saying that one standard drink, you might not get served one standard drink. You might get served 1.5 or 2 standard drinks because that's the can that you're drinking, or that's the glass that was served to you. So it's very hard to calculate in Australia really how much you drink in a certain time frame. When it comes to penalties, they are quite severe now. So for low range drink driving, starting at 0.05, really, the police can now suspend your license. On the spot, you can lose your license, and that can have a severe impact on work, study, family life, income, all of that. You can take this to court, but depends on the judge. You might end up with a longer disqualification or higher fine. For mid-range, that's something that has now been introduced, that people have to install an interlock system. And an interlock system, I'll put the photo in here, it's like a breathalyzer for the car. And people usually get disqualified for a few months, so they can't drive at all, and then they have to have an interlock in their car. That means they cannot start the car without providing a sample of breath, and that has to be with no alcohol in place. You might find yourself having to drive maybe a friend's car or someone's car that has one of those interlocks installed. In this case, you also have to blow into this machine to start and drive this car. What happens as well is that those machines go off at random intervals while you're driving. They will ask you to pull over and provide another sample. And that's just to prevent that people ask their passenger that hasn't had a drink to blow into the machine to start the car. They have really tamper-proof those machines that people can't cheat that system. But that's something to be aware of as well. And that's actually something that costs a lot of money for the people that have to get it installed in their car. And then obviously for high range, especially repeat offenders, they will potentially look at having their vehicle taken away from them, confiscated. They might even look at prison terms. So drink driving is something we really want to step away from, and let people know that there should be a plan B in place. And you might see those advertisements everywhere. RBT means plan B. You don't want to get done for drink driving. You essentially want to have a plan before you go out. And whatever that plan looks like for you and your friends, it might be catching public transport, but public transport might not be available. So it might be sharing a cab, sharing an Uber with someone, calling someone to pick you up, or having a designated driver. Walking home, yeah, if it's safe, if you feel safe to walk home, that's an option. but I also want to warn people not to walk home when they're severely intoxicated, as you would also pose a risk to yourself, but also to other road users. And I have another look at the question. Can we drive a friend around who has an interlock in their car? Yes, essentially, yes, you can. Like I said, if you're driving your friend's car that has an interlock in their car, you will have to blow into that interlock as the driver, and you have to blow 0. And I think that answers the question, isn't it? Did that answer it? I hope it did.
Yeah, that's good, Connie.
Okay. If not, just let me know and I can see if I can get a better answer on that one. So flying carpet, I haven't come across that plan B, not an option. but discuss with your friends what your options should be and make that plan before you go out. And quickly on other drugs, and I do want to mention it because, and I should actually go back a couple of slides here and tell you what happens when you get pulled over by the police and what happens when they show you one of those machines. So police say randomly they pull people over. Sometimes they pull a whole lot of people over and ask them to, park their car at the side. And then the police officer comes up to you and they will ask you if you had something to drink, and if you had something to drink, when you consumed that drink, if it was just recently or a while ago. And then they have this handheld machine. And you can see here, it comes with a little plastic straw. This machine has 2 functions. One, it comes without the plastic straw, and the police officer might just hold it to your mouth and ask you to count to 10. And by speaking, that machine picks up any alcohol that you exhale. And it will not give them a number of how much you're blowing over the limit. It will give them a pass or fail. If it detects any alcohol, then they usually put that little straw on and will ask you again to blow into this machine. And if you've never done it before, take your time, take a deep breath, try to relax a little bit. I know it can be quite challenging or confronting when a police officer pulls you over, but try to relax and listen to their advice. I usually say to people, it's like blowing up a balloon. Take a deep breath and exhale for as long as you can without stopping or without inhaling again. And the machine will count, and it's usually a few seconds that you have to exhale, and then it gives a beep, and then it gives the police officer a reading of how high your blood alcohol concentration is. So that's what's happening when you get pulled up on the side of the road. So don't be scared, just follow the advice of the police officers here. And for other drugs, the reason why I put that one in those slides as well is because often the police officers do a couple of tests, one for alcohol, one for drugs. And just to mention some of those illicit substances that we find are consumed and get people in trouble on the road. Cannabis or opioids, they're considered depressant drugs. They slow down your reaction times. They impair your judgment, and especially your time and distance, how you judge that. They decrease your coordination and might mean that you drive a lot slower, or you're in and out of lanes, you're not paying much attention, and it might take you a lot longer to react to things that are happening on the road. Methamphetamines, cocaine, MDMA or ecstasy, they are what we call stimulant drugs. And the driving we see on the road is often a lot more aggressive, more erratic. People go a bit faster. They might swerve in and out of lanes. They might be really close up behind you, keeping an unsafe distance to other cars. And again, they might fail to react to different circumstances on the road. And then we also have prescription drugs. So drugs prescribed to you by a doctor or handed to you at the pharmacy. And here the advice is that yes, it can come with some side effects like dizziness, drowsiness, that slow reaction time. Some people say they have decreased coordination, they feel tired, have blurred vision. If you feel that you have any of those side effects after taking any medications, yes, there are legal medications prescribed to you by a doctor, but if you feel any of those side effects, then please don't drive. It's almost like driving while intoxicated. As I mentioned before, the police can test for drugs, and they don't test you necessarily for prescription drugs. They can if they suspect that you are not quite right on the road, but they can test you for those illicit substances by using a little tongue swab. It's called mobile drug test, MDT, and it tests for 4 substances that I mentioned before: ecstasy, methamphetamines, cannabis, and cocaine. And you can see this little strip here. It's just like I would now call it like one of those rapid tests, but a bit larger than that. And it actually breaks into 2 pieces. And this blue piece here comes with 2 little spots, and you will be asked to wipe them over your tongue. Once you've done that, they pop that casing back together and wait a few minutes. And as I mentioned, then it's similar to those rapid tests or like a pregnancy test. It comes back with a few lines if you actually detect positive for those drugs. Positive is not a good thing. In this case, it means it's detected that you've got a drug in your system. And for those drugs, it's black and white. It doesn't actually test, similar to alcohol, of how much drug is in your system or how much you are under influence. It will test, are you having a drug in your system, yes or no? And if you do, then you get charged. There are 3 tests to this. So one is, again, police pulls you over, you do this test while you're in the car. If it comes back negative, you will be allowed to drive and continue on. If it's positive, the police will ask you to either step into one of those roadside drug buses, or they will bring you back to the police station for a secondary test. It's very similar. It's also a swab, a saliva swab. Looks very similar, but has a different machine that they slide it into. If that comes back negative, you will be allowed to drive home, or good, go on your ways. But if it's positive, you will get banned from driving for 24 to 48 hours, depends. And then this second test, is sent to a lab. And again, the lab will look at it. And if it's indeed positive, and it will determine exactly how much of the drug was in your system, you will get notified either by the court to attend the court, or you will get your license suspended. So it's kind of a 3-way testing method, but as I mentioned, it's black and white. It doesn't test if you've consumed the drug 2 or 3 days ago and it's still showing in your system. It will test if you have a drug in your system right now and will be charging you on that. Saying that, you can also get charged for driving with other substances in your system that are not tested with this mobile drug test, like, for instance, heroin, which not a lot of people take in Australia, prescription drugs as well. If the police essentially feels that you're unsafe as a driver and they think that you're under the influence of a certain substance, they can even arrest you for a time, take you to a hospital and make you undergo a blood or urine test, in which case they can find out if you've consumed anything, and if you did, then they will charge you. Again, the penalties, it's usually a suspension for your license and a fine. And obviously for repeat offenses, those fines can go up quite high. And also those disqualification or suspension times can go up quite some time. Okay. I think we're moving okay with time. I'll just have another look. Okay, leave that question there for now. And the next few slides will give you a bit more information on really useful website to get information, but it will give you a bit more information on licensing and registering a car, things like that. So I will use a lot of links here, and I hope they will work and pop up when I click on them. First of all, international drivers and riders. If you hold an overseas license, you are allowed to drive on this license here in New South Wales or in Australia, as long as you remain a temporary overseas visitor, as long as your license remains current, as long as you have not been disqualified from driving, and as long as you had not your license suspended or cancelled, or had any of those driving privileges withdrawn. It's pretty self-explanatory. Yes, as a student, as a temporary overseas visitor, you can drive on your international license, your overseas license. If you have a license that expires or needs to be renewed after a certain time, then obviously you can't stay that time frame. And obviously, if you have been disqualified, say for speeding, and your international license has been taken away from you, then you cannot drive. In Australia, you must, once you drive a car or a motorcycle, you must carry a license with you at all times. And if your license is not written in English, you must also carry either a translation or what is called an international driving permit. It sometimes sounds strange because there's not much to translate on license, I find. But that's the law here, so that you need either an English translation or an international driving permit. And the English translation needs to be by a certified translator. You don't have to get a New South Wales license, obviously, if you comply with all those conditions. But if your visitor status changes, then you need to apply for a license, which means that if you apply for permanent residency or temporary permanent residency, then you will need to apply for a license. You can also, depends, you might want to take a job that requires you to have a New South Wales license. You can certainly apply for that New South Wales license, even as a temporary overseas visitor. And I give you a few more information as well. So this one on this website or on this slide here is about registration and CTP insurance. So this is if you are thinking about buying a car. You need to know that all cars here in Australia, to drive them, they need to be registered in the state or the territory that you live in. So here in New South Wales, obviously it needs to be registered in New South Wales, and it will need to show that license plate. It is a little bit different because all states and territories have different laws. So really get some good information from the website or the Service New South Wales Centre if you're planning to purchase a car from, say, interstate. Sometimes it means that you have to go through more checks to make sure that the car is roadworthy before you can register it here in New South Wales. So for the registration to take place, your car needs to be roadworthy. So make sure that everything is working on the car. Don't just go for the cheapest price, go for something that is safe and sound. And to register this car as well, you also need to purchase what is called a CTP, or compulsory third-party insurance. It's also often referred to as the green slip. And that's just an insurance that you need to pay that protects you and other people in case you end up in a motor vehicle accident. It doesn't cover for any damage to your vehicle or to any vehicles involved in a crash or property, but it will essentially pay for time of work and healthcare and all those costs associated when you injure someone on the road. So to register a car, like I said, you need to make sure that your car is roadworthy. That means you often have to bring it to a mechanic and they just quickly check it over, make sure the brakes and lights and wipers and everything, the tires, everything is working and in order. That is called the pink slip. And then the green slip is the insurance. And when you have ticked all that, you can register your car in New South Wales in Australia. As for websites, Transport for, oh, it's getting late in the day. Transport for New South Wales is the website that provides you with all the information. Once you go on this website, it will come up and it will give you different information. It would also give you information if you want to buy a boat and be on the water. But other than that, it gives you information on your license, but also how to register a car. Or say, for instance, you go and travel to Sydney and you go through toll roads, how to go and pay for those, accessing those roads or tunnels. Applying for a license, and put this as applying for a learner's permit. Not everyone, if you come from overseas, and I can't give everyone an answer on that one. It really depends on which country you're from and what type of license you're holding. It depends on how similar the road rules are to Australia. For me, I've come from Germany. It was just changing over my license from a German license to an Australian license. I didn't have to sit any tests and didn't have to do any additional driver training. I could go straight from a full license to a full license here in Australia. I know from past educations or seminars like this that for some countries, they will take away your full license essentially and ask you to restart with a learner's permit. If that's the case, then the Service New South Wales, those staff will advise you on how to do that. There is also the website on how to apply. And again, that's the Transport for New South Wales website, how to apply for a license, what kind of documents you would need to bring, the application fee that you need to pay, the application you need to fill in. And what I want to point out here is that you can actually, and maybe that's the question to in regards to parking, there is something that is called a driver knowledge test. And if you click on that one, you can actually do as many times as you want. You can do a practice run. So prepare for a driver knowledge test, which is mandatory if you go for your learner's license. But anyone, even on a full license, you can practice this test to see if you're familiar with those road rules here in Australia or New South Wales. There's also a handbook that you can download, which gives you a lot of information on road rules, where to park, street signage, and all of that. So for the question before on where to park and how to know, I would advise you to maybe jump on this website, have a practice run on this test, and then also have a look in the road user handbook. Okay. Like I said, getting your license, it's never easy. It's always nerve-wracking. But have a practice test and see how you go before actually attending to the service center to go for your license. Now, with the learner's permit, there are some differences around, do you need to keep a logbook or not? And that depends on your age. If you're aged under 25, you need to keep a logbook, and you need to have accumulated 120 hours of supervised driving. And you can only do that supervised driving with a fully licensed driver next to you. So you're behind the steering wheel, but you have someone with a full license sitting next to you giving you advice. There are some ways of how you can I guess, reduce those hours. And that is one is by attending a safer driver course. Again, this one is a website, same website actually, again, just a different section of it. Essentially, you can, often attend a group where you discuss a few things around being safe on the roads. Then there's often a coaching session involved, and you can calculate a few more hours for attending one of these. You can find a course provider, so you just click on this and you have a list of providers coming up for your area that you can approach to find one of those providers. There's also, and I tried to look it up before, but maybe due to COVID, our local council areas haven't really set some new dates for these. But Wollongong, Shellharbour and Kayama Council, they usually put or work together on this 2 or 3 times a year and do what is called a learner logbook run. It's very similar to the driver course for learners. Again, you're attending usually a whole day with your fully licensed supervisor, and you are sitting a few sessions that are quite interesting actually, and then you're going on the road. And those attending those kind of workshops usually means that you can deduct a few more hours from your learner logbook. From your learner logbook. For learners that are over the age of 25, you still cannot drive without a supervisor next to you, but you don't need to keep log of those hours. It is advisable that you drive with someone that can supervise you, that you go through different, driving on different roads, driving in different speed zones, maybe driving at night time as well. It is really advisable to make the most of the supervisors next to you and draw from their experience before actually going for your full license or for your provisional license. And I just noticed that is my last slide, so I'm still happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Connie. I think you've answered all the questions. There were some pre-submitted. I'll turn my camera on. Bear with me. Is it doing it? It's a bit slow. It must have gone to sleep. There we go. There were some pre-submitted questions which talked about how do you need an international license, which you've covered that. One student did ask, does this session today count towards your driving hours for students on the learner's license? I'm pretty sure, yep, no, that's not counted. So otherwise, I think we're all good.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned before, I will maybe put an email together, or maybe even a little information flyer together,
Yep.
which I haven't done prior to this session. There's a few of those websites, and I'm happy, Melissa, for you to share it with the students that are attending this workshop, and hopefully that will guide them on where to go, especially if you do apply for a learner's or a license or need to go for a test or anything like that.
That would be wonderful. Thank you, Connie. And I just wanted to say thank you. You've presented such thorough information for everybody. So I don't think there's any excuses for people not to be doing the right thing. Like we said before, this session has been recorded. So if you missed the end bit or if you were late, it'll be available in the coming days. It'll be just on the website where you registered for the webinar. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Connie, again. And I hope everyone stays safe on the roads and has a wonderful Easter.
Same. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.